Hello and welcome again to Backpage. I'm Jody Seay, and today we're talking with not a writer but an illustrator. We've invited Marty Jones to come on and talk to us about the fine art of fine art. So welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Tell me about your life and your work.
Starting when?
Well, in reading your bio information, you said, I don't remember a time that I didn't draw.
Right.
So you started drawing as a little boy?
Oh yeah, I remember in grade school covering pieces of paper with these stick figure stories of battle. And long before Lord of the Rings, I was doing Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm.
Probably was supposed to be doing something that the teacher wanted me to do, but I was doodling all over the stuff. And when I occasionally teach art classes for kids, they talk about what was your first drawing, and I'd draw a stick man, because I did stick man until probably 5th or 6th grade, because it was just fast and easy.
Mm-hmm.
My art has always been geared toward fast and easy. It never is, but that's kind of, there's always a timeline that I'm dealing with. And
who decides the timeline? Someone calls you and says, I need this illustration for this book by next Wednesday?
That's, yeah. The books, I've done 5 books now, none of which anyone's read. But all of them, it's been, okay, you have 6 weeks
mm-hmm.
to do this entire book. And in that 6 weeks, I'll probably put in easily 600 hours.
Whoa.
Yeah, because I get really detail-oriented, and consequently, if I look at what I do on an hourly wage, I could bag groceries for probably a whole lot better than I do drawing, but it's nowhere near as fun.
Yeah.
And if it's not
on your hand, though.
Well, that could be. Although then I'd have elbow problems because my elbows would give out from bagging the groceries. Because I used to bag groceries when I was a kid. But if it's not a client telling me I have a deadline, it's then usually this little voice inside my head saying, you got to get this done. Because there's another idea that I want you to work on as soon as you get this one done. And the trick is to not lose track of that other idea as well as the one that I'm working on. So it's most of if the deadline isn't imposed by someone else, I'll impose my own. It's just kind of my nature.
So in looking at your biographical information, you got a bachelor's degree in architecture from the University of Oregon, and then you were a structural inspector, and what else did you do? You did a number of things before you got into
as a matter of fact, I was here for 2 years in architecture, even though it took me 2 years to find out there really wasn't an architecture program here when I was here. No one suggested to me that I should research what it was that I wanted to major in. I just thought college was kind of like big high school, and if they'd had it in high school, then therefore they must have it in college. And I went to Benson Tech and studied drafting, and I had a teacher, his name was William Seabriak, who taught illustration the spring term of every year. And we would do technical illustrating, and I thought, wow, this has got to be the best fun of anything on earth. And so I just assumed, okay, when I go to Oregon State, and I was going to go to Oregon State because my cousin was going here, and I certainly would not go someplace where I knew absolutely no one. Cousin and I weren't very close, because he and I were just not much alike, but he was going here, and so I was going to room with him, and I'd come here and I studied studied illustration. And I remember being in one of the big lecture halls, and they said, if you're going to art, go to this room, and if you're going to architecture, go to this room, and there was nothing listed for illustration. And I thought, shoot, that's kind of a bummer. And so there was art in room 106 or whatever it was, and architecture in such and such a hall, and I'd heard the term starving artist, and that seemed like a really silly thing to major in. And so architecture was the other choice. I thought, gosh, I don't really want to draw houses all my life, but it's better than starving artists, so I'll do architecture. So I became an architecture major. And the program that was here at Oregon State at the time was mostly focusing on drawing, So it didn't really matter a whole lot that I wasn't getting any architecture courses. What I'd been told, along with the rest of the class, was that we could get our degree here and then go to University of Oregon and work on our master's. What they kind of left out was the part where you took all of your undergraduate courses at graduate rates to get all the other stuff that was missing. So there was this mass exodus of the entire class in '72 to that other school. And so that's where I actually started architecture. I still never wanted to be one. And when I got through with my degree, I still didn't want to be an architecture or an architect or anything like that. So I decided to talk my dad into building a house for him, because he'd been a builder back in the 50s, and I had this degree. I'd be a piece of cake. A year and a half later, I couldn't wait to get away from this albatross that I had saddled myself with.
You and Dad weren't speaking at this point?
Oh, we were still living in the same house, so speaking was a requirement, although you have to realize we never really spoke much anyway. And what his lessons to me in how to build a house were, he would come up every day at lunch and point out everything that I did wrong. Over the year and a half, I got to the point where I had learned if I did something wrong to do it in the early afternoon, because that way I had at least 24, maybe longer hours to cover it up before he showed up, and that way I could hide it. And I'm living in that house today, so I can't really make any complaints about anything, because, oh yeah, that's that thing I never did finish, huh? And it's still not finished. My sister just moved in with us, so I'm actually taking care of a few of those things that haven't been finished in the last 30 years. But I thought, no, I don't want to do construction, so I went to work in retail for a little while and learned I didn't want to do retail either. Finally decided, okay, I'm going to go into architecture. I found the one firm in Portland that was hiring a U of O student in 1977 or so. And when I went to work for them, I was doing the same kind of drafting that I had been doing in grade school. I'm getting paid a lot more for it than I was in grade school, but it was really basic kinds of stuff, and I did that for 6 months, and I was starting to have stomach problems, and because I kept thinking, I have a degree. I'm doing stuff. I'm drawing little pictures, you know. And
well, did you just hate it?
Yeah, I hated it.
Yeah.
And so I went back into construction, which I said I would never do, but it's like, well, I've done retail, I've done architecture, I guess that's the only thing left. And I did that for, I guess probably 7, 8 years, something like that, and then the early 80s hit, and the economy tanked, kind of similar to what's going on today. People would say, man, you should have been here last year. Well, thank you. I really appreciate hearing that. And so then I found that the City of Portland was hiring in the Building Bureau. And being really good at taking tests, I got a job as a building plans examiner and just sort of assumed that they would train me in how to do what I was doing. I soon figured out, though, that since they had a series of tests that had been designed to weed people out, and I had passed those tests, therefore I must know how to do what it is that I was testing for. So there really wasn't any need to train me because I was already qualified with my architecture degree.
That's kind of scary.
It was really scary, especially a contractor would walk in and say, well, here's my situation, what do you think I ought to do? And you know, I'm sitting there, well, if I was doing it, because I was doing this last week, if I was doing it, I'd do such and such. And then I found out, oh, the City of Portland says I need to do such and such. So, wait, no, the City of Portland didn't say anything. You just asked my opinion, I gave you my opinion, and that really scared me because I suddenly realized everything that came out of my mouth was now law.
So at what point?
1988.
You said, enough of this.
No, my appendix popped.
Oh.
Yeah, and it was like...
So life-altering event?
Well, yeah, it was like 2 days after I was admitted into the hospital, I finally woke up and think, no, wait, this wasn't on my agenda. I had been earlier in the year working on a fundraising thing for my sister, and had used up most of my sick time and vacation time. And so here I'm in the hospital, and the way it worked out is when I got released, I'd also used up all of my vacation and sick time. And I still wasn't, I was released from the hospital, but I wasn't really well enough to go back to work. And so I'd go back in part-time, and Judy finally suggested, why don't you start doodling or drawing or something while you're talking to the people about building code stuff, because you love to draw. And so I started drawing again. Hadn't drawn anything not work-related for quite a while.